Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Shadowscript, and tonight, you're stepping into the darkness. These aren't just stories, these are rain-soaked nightmares, carefully crafted to keep you wide awake. Every drop outside your window, every shadow that moves in the corner of your eye, might be part of something far more terrifying. So plug in your headphones, turn off the lights, and let the rain guide you into fear. These are scary night horror stories, with rain sound, and they're not for the faint of heart. Now let's begin. Our first story is titled, The Cabin Beyond the Flooded Trail, written by Emily Darkmore. The rain hammered against the windshield of Marcus Thompson's rental car as he navigated the winding mountain road through the dense forests of northern Ontario. Thunder cracked overhead, and lightning illuminated the towering pines that seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel of darkness. His GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, and now he was driving blind through the Canadian wilderness. Marcus was a freelance journalist from Chicago who had come to this remote region to investigate reports of mysterious disappearances along the hiking trails. What was supposed to be a simple 3-day research trip had turned into a nightmare when the storm hit unexpectedly. The weather forecast had called for light showers, not this biblical deluge. As another bolt of lightning split the sky, Marcus spotted a narrow dirt road branching off to his left. A weathered wooden sign, barely visible through the rain, read Blackwood Trail, 2 miles. He hesitated. The main road was becoming increasingly treacherous, with water rushing across it in several places. At least the side road led uphill, away from the flooding. He turned onto the dirt path, his car's headlights cutting through the driving rain. The road was rough and narrow, forcing him to drive slowly. Branches scraped against the windows, and more than once he had to swerve to avoid fallen logs. After what felt like an eternity, his headlights illuminated a small wooden cabin nestled among the trees. The cabin appeared abandoned, with dark windows and a sagging front porch. But it was shelter, and Marcus was desperate. He parked as close as possible and made a mad dash through the rain to the front door. To his surprise, the door was unlocked. Inside, the cabin was musty and cold, but dry. Marcus used his phone's flashlight to survey the single room. There was a stone fireplace, a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and dust covered everything. On the table sat an old oil lamp and what appeared to be a leather-bound journal. Lightning flashed outside, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm was getting worse. Marcus found some matches near the fireplace and managed to light the oil lamp, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He also discovered a small stack of dry firewood and soon had a fire crackling in the hearth. As warmth began to fill the cabin, Marcus examined the journal on the table. The leather cover was worn smooth, and the pages were yellowed with age. He opened it carefully, squinting at the faded handwriting on the first page. Property of Dr. William Ashworth, 1987. Marcus flipped through the pages, finding entries dating back decades. Most were routine observations about the weather, wildlife, and hiking conditions. But as he read deeper, the entries became stranger and more disturbing. June 15th, 1987. Something is wrong with this place. The animals avoid this area entirely. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The silence is unnatural. June 20th, 1987. Found strange symbols carved into the trees about half a mile north. They weren't there yesterday. I'm certain of it. June 25th, 1987. The dreams are getting worse. I see things that haven't happened yet. Or have they? Time feels different here. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He turned to the last entry, dated just 3 days ago. A man will come during the storm. Dark hair, about 30 years old, wearing a blue jacket. He drives a silver car and carries a leather satchel. He is running from something, though he doesn't know what yet. His name is Marcus Thompson. Marcus's blood ran cold. He looked down at his blue jacket, then at his leather satchel, sitting by the door. This was impossible. The handwriting was clearly old, faded, nothing like fresh ink. Yet here was his exact description, his exact name. With trembling hands, He turned the page. The next entry was in the same aged handwriting. He will read about himself and feel fear. He will check his watch. It is 9:47 p.m. Marcus instinctively looked at his phone. 9:47 p.m. exactly. He will stand up and walk to the window. He will see nothing but his own reflection staring back, pale and frightened. Against his better judgment, Marcus found himself standing and walking to the window. In the glass, illuminated by the lamp behind him, he saw his own face, pale, eyes wide with terror, his hands shaking. He returned to the journal. He will try to leave now, but his car won't start. The engine will turn over, but won't catch. He will try 3 times before giving up. Marcus slammed the journal shut and grabbed his keys. This was insane. He was letting some old man's ramblings get to him, but as he reached for the door handle, he hesitated. What if the journal was right? What if his car wouldn't start? He opened the door and ran through the rain to his car. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. He tried again. Nothing. A 3rd time. The engine sputtered and died. Marcus sat in the driver's seat, water dripping from his hair, staring at the cabin. The warm glow from the windows that had seemed so welcoming now appeared sinister. He had no choice but to go back inside. The journal was still on the table where he'd left it. With growing dread, he opened it again. He will return, soaked and frightened. He will read this entry and understand that he cannot escape what is written. The storm will not end until his part is played. At 10:15 p.m., he will hear something moving in the walls, scratching, like claws on wood. Marcus checked his phone. 10:14 p.m. He held his breath, listening to the rain and wind outside. Then, at exactly 10:15, he heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from inside the walls. It started near the fireplace and slowly moved around the room. He will follow the sound to the back corner, where he will find a loose floorboard. Beneath it, he will find the remains of Dr. William Ashworth. The scratching stopped directly below the floorboard in the corner. Marcus knelt and pried it up with his fingers. Underneath, partially mummified by the dry conditions, was a human skeleton wearing the rotted remains of hiking clothes. A wallet in the jacket pocket contained a driver's license, Dr. William Ashworth, expired 1987. Marcus stumbled backward, his mind reeling. If Dr. Ashworth had been dead for nearly 40 years, who had been writing in the journal? And how did the entries know about him? He turned back to the journal with growing horror. He will understand now that time moves differently here. Past, present, and future blend together. Dr. Ashworth is not gone. He is everywhere and everyone in this place. And now so is Marcus Thompson. At 10:30 p.m., Marcus will take the pen from his satchel and begin to write. He will write about the next visitor, the one who will come tomorrow night. A woman named Catherine Mills, driving a red sedan. Marcus looked at his phone. 10:29 p.m. In his satchel, he could see his pen, the one he'd brought for taking notes during his research. His hand began to move toward it, seemingly of its own accord. He will fight it at first, but the words will come anyway. The cabin demands its chronicler. Dr. Ashworth served for 37 years. Now it is Marcus's turn. Marcus tried to resist, but his hand closed around the pen. The journal fell open to a blank page, and he found himself writing. October 23rd, 2024. A woman will come during tomorrow's storm. Red hair, about 25 years old, wearing a green raincoat. She drives a red Honda Civic and carries a hiking backpack. She is searching for her missing brother. Her name is Catherine Mills. Even as he wrote, Marcus could see it happening. Somehow, he could perceive tomorrow night as clearly as if it were unfolding before him. Catherine Mills, crying as she searched for her brother, who had disappeared on these trails. She would find the cabin just as Marcus had, seeking shelter from another storm. The pen moved across the page without his conscious control. She will find Marcus Thompson's body in the back corner, next to Dr. Ashworth's remains. She will read this journal and learn about herself. At 9:23 p.m., she will hear footsteps on the roof, though there is no one there. Marcus tried to stop writing, but the words kept flowing. He could see Catherine's terrified face as she read about herself. He could see her checking her watch at 9:23 p.m. Could see her looking up at the ceiling as the footsteps began. She will take the pen and write about the next visitor, a man named David Chun who will arrive on October 25th. And so it continues, as it has continued, as it will continue. The pen fell from Marcus's numb fingers. He understood now. This wasn't just a cabin. It was a trap, a place where time folded in on itself. Dr. Ashworth had been caught here in 1987, forced to chronicle the fate of future visitors. Now Marcus would take his place, writing about people who hadn't even been born yet, watching their stories unfold with the clarity of someone who had already lived them. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but Marcus knew it would return tomorrow night, and the night after that. It would always return, bringing new visitors to the cabin beyond the flooded trail. He picked up the pen again and continued writing. Marcus Thompson will serve as chronicler until his death in 2061. He will write about 2,847 visitors in total. Each will find the journal. Each will read about themselves. Each will become part of the endless cycle. The cabin exists outside of normal time. It is a wound in reality, a place where the future bleeds into the past. Those who enter become unstuck from the normal flow of time, able to see all moments at once. As Marcus wrote, he began to understand the true horror of his situation. It wasn't just that he was trapped. It was that he had always been trapped. From the moment he was born, his path had led inevitably to this cabin, to this journal, to this endless duty of chronicling the fate of strangers. He could see his entire life laid out like a map. His childhood in Chicago, his career as a journalist, his decision to investigate the disappearances. Every choice had been an illusion. The cabin had been waiting for him, and he had been walking toward it his entire life. The oil lamp flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Marcus continued writing, his hand moving automatically. The visitors think they are making choices, but they are only following the script. Free will is an illusion here. The cabin has already seen every possible future, every possible choice. It knows how each story will end. Some try to burn the journal, but it cannot be destroyed. Some try to leave, but they always return. Some try to warn others, but the warnings are never heard. The cabin protects itself. Marcus looked up from the journal and saw his reflection in the dark window. But it wasn't his reflection anymore. It was Dr. Ashworth's face, aged and hollow, staring back at him with eyes that had seen too much. And behind Ashworth's face, he could see the faces of all the others who had served as chroniclers, stretching back through decades, maybe centuries. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Marcus knew that somewhere out there, Catherine Mills was getting ready for a hiking trip, unaware that her fate was already written in the pages before him. Just as David Chun was planning his camping expedition, just as hundreds of others were living their lives, never knowing that they were already trapped in the cabin's web of predestination. Marcus picked up the pen and wrote the final entry. The chronicler understands now that he is not just recording the future, he is creating it. Each word he writes becomes reality. Each prediction becomes truth. The cabin feeds on this power, growing stronger with each new story. When Marcus Thompson dies in 2061, he will choose his successor. He will write about them, and they will come, drawn by the same irresistible force that brought him here. The cycle will continue, as it has always continued. The cabin beyond the flooded trail is eternal. It exists in all time simultaneously, waiting for the next visitor, the next chronicler, the next soul to feed its endless hunger for stories. Marcus set down the pen and walked to the fireplace. The flames were dying down, but he could still see shapes in the embers, faces of the people he would write about, lives he would chronicle, futures he would seal with his words. Outside, the storm had passed, but Marcus knew it would return. It always returned, bringing new visitors to the cabin that existed outside of time, beyond the reach of hope or escape. He sat down at the table and opened the journal to a fresh page. There was so much more to write, so many stories to tell. Catherine Mills was just the beginning. After her would come David Chun, then Maria Rodriguez, then James Mitchell, then hundreds more, each drawn to the cabin by forces they couldn't understand. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, Marcus Thompson began to write about tomorrow night, his pen moving steadily across the page, recording a future that had already become the past the moment he entered the cabin beyond the flooded trail. The cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in the small town of Millbrook, Ontario, and Emma Thompson was beginning to lose her mind. Not because of the weather itself, but because of what came with it. It started during the first storm of autumn. Emma had been living in the old Victorian house on Maple Street for barely 2 months, having moved from Toronto after her divorce. The house was a steal at that price, the realtor had said, though he'd grown oddly quiet when she asked why it had been on the market for so long. That first night, as rain drummed against her bedroom window, Emma heard them, whispers, soft, urgent voices that seemed to rise from the very droplets themselves. She'd pressed her ear to the glass, thinking perhaps it was just the wind playing tricks, but the voices were too distinct, too purposeful. Emma, they seemed to call. Emma, come outside. She dismissed it as stress from the move, maybe her imagination running wild in the unfamiliar house. But the voices returned with every rainfall, growing clearer and more insistent each time. By the third week, Emma had started keeping a journal, documenting when she heard the voices and what they said. The entries grew increasingly frantic. October 15th, rain started at 11 p.m. Voices began immediately. They know my name. They're calling me October 18th. Voices are getting louder. I can make out individual words now. They're pleading with me to come outside. Why do they want me outside? October 22nd. I looked up the history of this house today. The previous owner, Margaret Winters, disappeared during a storm last year. They never found her body. Emma's neighbor, Mrs. Chun, had lived next door for 40 years. When Emma finally worked up the courage to ask about Margaret, the elderly woman's face had gone pale. That poor girl, Mrs. Chun whispered, glancing nervously at Emma's house. She started acting strange in the weeks before she vanished. Said she heard voices in the rain. We all thought she was having a breakdown after her husband's death. What happened the night she disappeared? Mrs. Chen's hands trembled as she poured tea. Worst storm we'd had in years. I saw her standing at her front door around midnight, just staring out into the rain. Next morning, the door was wide open and she was gone. Police found her slippers on the porch, but no other trace. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The rain had started again, and with it, the voices. But this time, they were different. More urgent, more desperate. Emma, please, you have to come. We're waiting. She found herself standing at her front door, hand on the knob, before she even realized she'd gotten out of bed. The voices were so clear now, so compelling. They sounded like old friends calling her home. No, she whispered to herself, backing away from the door. This is insane. But as the days passed, the voices grew more persistent. They began calling during light drizzles, not just heavy storms. Emma started hearing them at work, in her car, even in the shower. They were always the same soft, feminine voices that seemed to know her deepest fears and desires. We understand your pain, Emma. Come to us. We can make it stop. Emma's research into the house's history revealed a disturbing pattern. Margaret Winters wasn't the first. Over the past 60 years, 3 other women had lived in the house and disappeared during storms. All had been found to have told neighbors or family about hearing voices in the rain. The first was Catherine Mills in 1962, then Janet Rogers in 1981, Rebecca Davis in 1999, and now Margaret in 2023. All single women, all living alone, all vanished without a trace during severe weather. Emma tried to leave town, but her car wouldn't start on the day she'd planned to go. The mechanic found nothing wrong with it. She called her sister in Vancouver, begging her to come get her, but a massive storm system had grounded all flights. It was as if something wanted her to stay. The voices grew bolder. They began speaking during the day, whispering her name from rain puddles and storm drains. Emma stopped going outside altogether, ordering groceries online and working from home. But the house itself seemed to be turning against her. Water stains appeared on the walls overnight, shaped like reaching hands. The pipes groaned and whispered in languages she didn't recognize. Rain seemed to fall harder on her house than anywhere else on the street. One night, Emma discovered a hidden room in the basement behind a false wall. Inside, she found journals belonging to the previous victims. Each told the same story, voices in the rain, growing compulsion to go outside, and then nothing. The final entries were all the same. Asterisk, I can't fight them anymore. They're calling me home. I have to go to them. Asterisk, but Margaret's journal had additional pages, written in a shaky, desperate hand. Asterisk, I was wrong. They're not trying to help. They're hungry. They feed on our essence, our life force. The rain is just how they travel, how they hunt. I can see them now. Shadows in the water, faces in the droplets. They've been feeding off women in this house for decades. I thought I could resist, but I'm so tired. So very tired. Asterisk. The final entry was dated the night Margaret disappeared. Asterisk, they're at the door. I can hear them clearly now. They're not alone. I can see the others who came before. Catherine, Janet, Rebecca. They're all there calling to me. But their eyes are empty. They're not alive anymore. They're just bait. I understand now. I have to go. I can't fight anymore. To whoever reads this, burn the house down. It's the only way to stop them. Asterisk. Emma's hands shook as she read. The rain was starting again outside, and she could already hear familiar whispers beginning. But this time, she could see them too. Shadowy figures pressed against every window, the faces distorted by the streaming water. They weren't human, not anymore. They were something else, something that had been masquerading as human voices to lure women to their deaths. Emma, they called, their voices now clearly inhuman, layered with malice and hunger. Come outside, Emma. Join us. It's so lonely out here. She ran upstairs, but the voices followed. Water began seeping through the walls, the ceiling, the floors. The house was flooding from the inside out, and in the water, she could see faces, dozens of them. All the women who had lived in this house, all the women who had answered the call. Emma grabbed her phone, but the screen showed only static. The landline was dead. The power flickered and went out. In the darkness, lit only by flashes of lightning, Emma saw them clearly. They weren't in the water. They were the water. Shapeless, hungry things that had learned to mimic human voices, to exploit loneliness and desperation. The front door burst open, and a torrent of rain poured in. But it wasn't just rain. It was them, flowing into the house like a living tide. Emma ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and cut her palm. She began writing on the wall in her own blood, the only thing that seemed to repel them momentarily. Asterisk warning, do not listen to voices in rain. Burn this house. They are not human. They feed on us. Do not let them take anyone else. Asterisk. But even as she wrote, she could feel her were weakening. The voices were so beautiful now, so comforting. They promised an end to pain, to loneliness, to the crushing weight of existence. Come to us, Emma, they whispered. Let us take the pain away. She found herself walking toward the open door, her bloody hand leaving prints on the walls. The knife clattered to the floor. Outside, she could see them clearly now. Dozens of women standing in the rain, their faces pale and empty, their eyes black as the storm clouds above. Margaret was among them, beckoning with a gentle smile. It's not so bad, she said. The hunger stops. The pain stops. Everything stops. Emma stepped onto the porch, rain immediately soaking through her clothes. The water was warm, almost welcoming. She could feel something moving beneath her feet, something vast and ancient and perpetually hungry. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll come. The last thing Emma Thompson remembered was the feeling of being pulled down into the earth beneath the rain, into a place where hungry things waited in the dark between the water molecules, where the voices of the drowned sang lullabies to the dying. The next morning, Mrs. Chun found Emma's front door standing open, just as she had found Margaret's. Emma's shoes sat neatly on the porch, and her bloody warning on the kitchen wall had been washed away by the rain. 3 days later, a new family moved into the house. A young couple from Toronto, attracted by the low price and the Victorian charm. The wife, Jessica, thought the house had such character. She couldn't wait for the next storm, because somewhere in the space between raindrops, Emma Thompson had joined the chorus of voices, and they were always looking for someone new to sing with. The windshield wipers of Marcus's old Jeep Cherokee squeaked against the glass as they cut through the torrential rain. Lightning illuminated the narrow country road ahead for brief, terrifying moments before plunging them back into darkness. Beside him, his best friend Tyler gripped the dashboard, his knuckles white with tension. "I told you we should have taken the highway," Tyler muttered, peering through the rain-streaked window. This backwoods route through Vermont was a terrible idea. Marcus squinted at the road ahead. They'd been driving for 3 hours since leaving their college in Boston, heading to a weekend cabin retreat in the mountains. What should have been a simple 2-hour drive had turned into a nightmare when they'd missed their exit and ended up on these winding country roads. "The GPS says we're close," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked confidence. The device had been acting up for the past hour, the signal cutting in and out as they drove deeper into the rural wilderness. A sudden crack of thunder shook the vehicle, and the GPS screen flickered once before going completely black. Tyler jabbed at it frantically, but it remained dead. "Great. Just great." Tyler ran his hands through his dark hair. "We're officially lost in the middle of nowhere." Marcus slowed the Jeep to a crawl, trying to make out any landmarks in the darkness. The headlights barely penetrated the wall of rain, and the trees on either side of the road seemed to press in closer with each passing mile. Ancient oaks and maples created a canopy so thick that even in daylight, this road would feel like driving through a tunnel. "Wait," Tyler said suddenly, pointing ahead. "Is that a light?" Marcus followed his gaze and saw it too, a faint, warm glow flickering between the trees about 50 yards ahead. It looked like a lantern, swaying gently as if someone was walking with it. "Thank God," Marcus breathed. "Maybe someone can give us directions." As they approached, the light seemed to move deeper into the forest, away from the road. Marcus pulled over and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the drumming of rain on the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. "Should we follow it?" Tyler asked, his voice uncertain. Marcus was already reaching for his jacket. "What choice do we have? We're completely lost, and that's the first sign of civilization we've seen in an hour." They stepped out into the storm, immediately soaked to the skin. The rain was so heavy it felt like standing under a waterfall. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, though its weak beam seemed pathetic compared to the warm, steady glow of the lantern ahead. The light bobbed between the trees, always just far enough ahead to be visible, but close enough to follow. They pushed through the underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes and rain streaming down their faces. The forest floor was soft and muddy, their feet sinking with each step. "This is insane," Tyler called over the storm. "We're going to get hypothermia out here." But Marcus pressed on, mesmerized by the lantern's glow. There was something comforting about it, something that made him feel like everything would be okay if they could just reach it. The light seemed to pulse with a warm, golden radiance that cut through the darkness like a beacon of hope. They'd been walking for what felt like hours when Tyler grabbed Marcus's arm. "Wait, stop." Marcus turned, annoyed. "What?" "Look around. Really look." Marcus swept his flashlight in a circle, and his blood ran cold. They were standing in a clearing, but it wasn't natural. The trees had been cut down, their stumps arranged in a perfect circle around them, and in the center of the circle, partially hidden by tall grass and weeds, were headstones. Old headstones. "We're in a cemetery," Tyler whispered. "A really old cemetery." The lantern continued to bob ahead, now moving between the weathered grave markers. Some of the stones were so old, the inscriptions had been worn away by decades of wind and rain. Others were broken, their pieces scattered across the ground. "We need to go back," Tyler said firmly. "This is wrong. Everything about this is wrong." But Marcus couldn't look away from the lantern. Now that they were closer, he could see that it wasn't electric. It was an old-fashioned oil lantern with a glass chimney and a brass base. The flame inside danced and flickered, casting warm shadows that seemed to beckon him forward. "Just a little further," Marcus said, his voice strange and distant. "We're so close." "Close to what?" Tyler grabbed his friend's shoulder. "Marcus, think about it. Who would be out here in this storm? In a cemetery? At midnight?" Marcus shrugged him off and continued walking. The lantern was moving between the headstones now, weaving a path through the graves. As they followed, Tyler began to read the inscriptions on the stones they passed. 1847, 1852, 1839. His voice grew smaller with each date. "Marcus, these graves are almost 200 years old." The lantern stopped. Marcus and Tyler froze, watching as the light swayed gently in place. They were now close enough to see that the lantern was indeed being held by someone, a tall figure in a dark coat. But something was wrong with the way the figure stood, the way it held itself. It was too still, too rigid. "Hello," Marcus called out, his voice cracking. "We're lost. Can you help us?" The figure slowly turned toward them, and both young men gasped. The face beneath the wide-brimmed hat was pale and gaunt, with deep, dark hollows where the eyes should be. The mouth was a black slash across ashen skin, and when it opened, no words came out, only a sound like wind whistling through dead leaves. "Run," Tyler whispered. "Marcus, we need to run. Now." But Marcus couldn't move. He was transfixed by the apparition, by the way the lantern's light seemed to dance across its ghostly features. The figure raised one skeletal hand and pointed directly at him. That's when Tyler saw the truth. The lantern wasn't being held by the figure at all. It was hanging from a rope around its neck, swaying with each movement of the corpse. And the rope was a noose. "Marcus!" Tyler screamed, grabbing his friend and pulling him backward. The spell broke. Marcus stumbled, his eyes clearing, and suddenly he could see what Tyler saw. The figure wasn't alive. It couldn't be alive. Its movements were too jerky, too unnatural. It was like watching a marionette being controlled by invisible strings. They turned and ran, crashing through the cemetery, jumping over graves and dodging headstones. Behind them, they could hear the sound of pursuit. Not footsteps, but something else. A dragging sound, like something being pulled across the ground. "The trees!" Tyler shouted. "We need to get back to the trees." But as they reached the edge of the cemetery, they realized their mistake. The forest around them looked exactly the same in every direction. Tall, ancient trees stretched up into the darkness, their branches intertwined overhead. There was no path, no way to tell which direction led back to the road. "We're lost," Marcus panted. "We're completely lost." The dragging sound was getting closer. Marcus risked a glance back and immediately wished he hadn't. The figure was following them, but it wasn't walking. It was being pulled along the ground by something unseen, the lantern swaying wildly as it bumped over roots and stones. "This way," Tyler said, picking a direction at random. They plunged into the forest, branches tearing at their clothes and faces. The rain had gotten worse, if that was possible, and the darkness seemed to press in around them like a living thing. They ran for what felt like hours, always hearing the dragging sound behind them, always seeing the faint glow of the lantern through the trees. No matter how fast they ran or which direction they turned, they couldn't shake their pursuer. Finally, exhausted and soaked to the bone, they collapsed against a massive oak tree. Marcus's lungs burned, and Tyler was shaking so hard he could barely stand. What was that thing?" Tyler gasped. Marcus shook his head. "I don't know, but I think it wanted us to follow it." "Follow it where?" Before Marcus could answer, the forest around them began to change. The trees seemed to shift and move, their trunks twisting into new configurations. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, like quicksand. "The lantern," Marcus whispered. "It's a trap." It lures people into the forest, and then what? Marcus pointed with a trembling finger. Through the trees, they could see more lights now, dozens of them. Lanterns hanging from the branches, swaying in the wind, and beneath each lantern, a figure stood motionless, waiting. Then you joined them, Marcus finished. The dragging sound was very close now. Tyler grabbed Marcus's arm. We have to keep moving. We have to find the road. But as they stumbled through the forest, the lights seemed to multiply. Soon there were hundreds of them, a constellation of lanterns stretching as far as they could see. And beneath each one, a figure in dark clothes, all watching, all waiting. The rain began to ease, and in the sudden quiet, they could hear something else, voices. Whispers carried on the wind, calling their names. Marcus, Tyler, come join us. It's warm here, safe. Don't listen, Tyler said through gritted teeth. Whatever you do, don't listen. But it was hard not to. The voices were so inviting, so friendly. They spoke of warmth and rest, of an end to their wandering. Some of the voices even sounded familiar, like old friends or family members. Tyler, one voice whispered. Tyler, it's me. It's your brother. Remember when we used to play in the woods behind the house? It's safe here, just like then. Tyler's brother had died in a car accident 3 years ago. It's not real, Tyler said, but his voice was weak. It's not real. Marcus, another voice called. Marcus, it's your grandfather, the one who taught you to fish. I've been waiting for you. I have so much to tell you. Marcus's grandfather had passed away when Marcus was 10 years old. The voices grew louder and more insistent. Soon there were dozens of them, all calling, all pleading, and the lanterns were moving again, closing in from all sides. There, Tyler suddenly shouted, I can see the road. Through the trees, they caught a glimpse of wet asphalt gleaming in the darkness. They ran toward it, fighting through the undergrowth, the voices following them every step of the way. But as they reached the edge of the forest, the road seemed to stretch away from them. No matter how fast they ran, it remained just out of reach, like a mirage in the desert. It's not real, Marcus said desperately. The road isn't real either. The lanterns were surrounding them now, forming a circle of light in the darkness. The figures beneath them were clearer now, and Marcus could see that they were all different ages, from different time periods. Some wore clothes from the 1800s, others from the early 1900s. All of them had the same pale, gaunt faces, the same dark, hollow eyes. We're going to die here, Tyler whispered. We're going to die and become one of them. The circle of lanterns began to close in. The figures moved with that same jerky, unnatural gait, as if they were being controlled by invisible strings. Their mouths opened and closed in unison, creating a sound like wind through dry leaves. Marcus closed his eyes, accepting his fate. But then he felt something, a warmth in his pocket. His phone. His dead phone was somehow warm. He pulled it out and gasped. The screen was glowing, showing a map with their location marked by a red dot. And there, just a few hundred yards away, was the road, the real road. Tyler, he shouted. This way. They ran toward the indicated direction, the figures lunging after them. Marcus could feel cold fingers brushing against his jacket, could hear the whisper of dead voices in his ear, but he kept running, following the glowing dot on his phone. Suddenly, they burst through a wall of trees and stumbled onto wet asphalt. The road was real, solid under their feet. Marcus's Jeep sat exactly where they'd left it, headlights still on, engines still running. They dove into the vehicle, and Marcus gunned the engine. As they sped away, he looked in the rearview mirror and saw them. Dozens of figures standing at the edge of the forest, their lanterns swaying in the wind. They made no move to follow, but Marcus could see them watching until the trees finally blocked them from view. They drove in silence for a long time, both of them shaking. It wasn't until they saw the neon glow of a 24-hour diner that either of them spoke. We need to tell someone, Tyler said finally. The police, the park service, somebody. Marcus nodded, but he was already beginning to doubt what they'd seen. In the warm light of the diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and bacon, The whole experience felt like a nightmare. Had it really happened? Had they really seen what they thought they'd seen? Over the next few days, they tried to find the cemetery again. They drove back to the same stretch of road, retraced their steps as best they could, but they found nothing. No cemetery, no headstones, no evidence that they'd ever left the road at all. The local historical society had no record of any cemetery in that area. The Park Service said the forest was protected land that had never been developed. According to everyone they spoke to, what they'd experienced was impossible. But Marcus still had his phone, and on it was a photo he didn't remember taking. It showed the cemetery, clear as day, with the weathered headstones and the tall figure holding the lantern, and in the background, barely visible, were Tyler and Marcus themselves, standing among the graves. They never spoke of it again, but both of them knew the truth. Somewhere in the forests of Vermont, there was a cemetery that existed between worlds, and in that cemetery, a figure with a lantern waited for lost travelers, ready to guide them to their eternal rest. On rainy nights, when the wind howls through the trees and the darkness seems absolute, they still sometimes see it, a faint glow flickering between the branches, beckoning them back to the place where the living and the dead walk together. But they never follow the lantern again, because they know now that some lights are meant to lead you home, and others are meant to lead you to places from which you can never return. The dead have all the time in the world to wait, and they're very, very patient. The first time Rebecca saw him, she thought he was just another homeless person seeking shelter from the storm. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and the rain hammered against the windows of their suburban home in Portland, Oregon. She was washing dishes when she glanced through the kitchen window and saw him standing across the street, motionless beneath the flickering streetlight. "David," she called to her husband, who was watching television in the living room. "There's someone standing out there in the rain." David joined her at the window, squinting through the downpour. The man was tall and thin, wearing what appeared to be a dark coat. His head was tilted slightly downward, but even from their distance, they could sense he was watching their house. "Probably just waiting for the bus," David said, though the nearest bus stop was 3 blocks away. "He'll move on soon enough." But the man didn't move, not for the next hour, not until the rain stopped at midnight, when he simply vanished as if he had never been there at all. Rebecca forgot about the incident until the following week, when another storm rolled through the Pacific Northwest. She was preparing dinner when she happened to glance outside and froze. There he was again, standing in the exact same spot, rain cascading off his motionless form. This time, she was certain he was closer. "David, he's back," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. David rushed to the window, and together they watched the mysterious figure. The man stood perfectly still, his face obscured by shadow and rain, but his posture suggested an unnatural patience. There was something deeply wrong about the way he held himself, as if he were made of stone rather than flesh. "I'm calling the police," David said, reaching for his phone. "Wait." Rebecca grabbed his arm. "What if he's just troubled? Maybe he needs help." But even as she said it, a chill ran down her spine. Something about the man's presence felt malevolent, as if he were studying them, learning their routines, their vulnerabilities. The police arrived 20 minutes later, but by then the rain had stopped and the man was gone. Officer Martinez, a veteran of the Portland Police Bureau, took their statement with professional courtesy but obvious skepticism. "No law against standing on a public sidewalk," he explained. "If he's not threatening you or trespassing, there's not much we can do, but we'll increase patrols in the area." The third time was different. It was a Friday night in November, and the rain came down in sheets. Rebecca was alone. David was working late at the accounting firm downtown. She was reading in the living room when she heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the wet pavement outside. She crept to the window and peered through the blinds. The man was there, but he had moved. He was no longer across the street, but standing on their side, perhaps 50 feet from their front door. In the pale streetlight, she could make out more details of his appearance. His coat was long and dark, possibly black or navy blue. His hair was plastered to his skull by the rain, and his hands hung at his sides with an unnatural stillness. Rebecca's heart hammered as she watched him. He stood there for what felt like hours, never moving, never looking away from their house. When David finally came home at 11:30, the man was gone. "You're being paranoid," David said when she told him what had happened. "Maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe he lives in the neighborhood." But Rebecca knew better. She began keeping a journal, documenting every rainy night, every sighting. The pattern was always the same. The man would appear when the rain started, stand motionless for hours, then disappear when the storm passed. And each time, he was closer. By December, he had moved to their front yard. Rebecca barely slept anymore. She would lie awake on rainy nights, listening for the sound of footsteps, watching shadows move across the ceiling. David grew increasingly irritated with her obsession, but she couldn't let it go. There was something about the man that defied explanation, something that made her skin crawl every time she thought about him. On a particularly violent storm night just before Christmas, Rebecca made a decision that would haunt her forever. She had been watching the man from the living room window for 2 hours. He stood on their front lawn, about 20 feet from the house, rain streaming down his motionless form. In the intermittent lightning, she could see that his eyes were open, staring directly at their front door. Something snapped inside her. She grabbed a flashlight and headed for the door. "Rebecca, don't!" David shouted, but she was already turning the deadbolt. The cold rain hit her like a physical blow as she stepped onto the porch. The man was still there, and now she could see him clearly. His face was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were soaked but seemed to cling to his thin frame in an unnatural way. Most disturbing of all, his lips were moving slightly, as if he were whispering something she couldn't hear over the storm. "What do you want?" she called out, her voice shaking. The man's head tilted slightly, and for the first time, Rebecca saw him move. It was a subtle gesture, but it sent terror shooting through her veins. He raised one arm slowly, deliberately, and pointed directly at her. His mouth opened, and though she couldn't hear the words over the thunder, she could read his lips. Soon, Rebecca stumbled backward, slamming the door and turning every lock. She pressed her back against the wood, gasping for breath, while David held her shaking form. "What did he say?" David asked. "Soon," she whispered. He said soon. The next morning, Rebecca researched the previous owners of their house. What she found made her blood run cold. The Andersons had lived there for 15 years, before selling to Rebecca and David. Mrs. Anderson had died of a heart attack in her sleep. Mr. Anderson had been found 3 days later, standing in the rain outside their old house, completely catatonic. He had been committed to a psychiatric facility, where he died 2 weeks later. The pattern continued through January and February. Each storm brought the man closer. He moved from the lawn to the porch steps, then to the porch itself. Rebecca installed security cameras, but they showed nothing but empty space where the man should have been. Yet she could see him clearly with her own eyes, standing there in the rain, getting closer each time. David began to think his wife was having a breakdown. He suggested therapy, medication, anything to help her cope with what he believed were hallucinations. But Rebecca knew what she was seeing was real, even if the cameras couldn't capture it. On a March night, when the rain fell like bullets against their windows, Rebecca watched from the living room as the man approached their front door. He moved with the same deliberate slowness he had shown for months, but now she could see his face clearly. His eyes were completely black, like holes in his skull, and his skin had taken on a corpse-like pallor. He reached their front door and stood there, inches from the wood, his face turned toward the window where Rebecca watched. His mouth moved again, and this time she could hear the words whispered through the storm. "Let me in." Rebecca's scream woke David, who found her collapsed on the living room floor, staring at the front door in terror. He saw nothing outside but rain and darkness. "He's right there," she sobbed. "Can't you see him?" But David saw nothing. The breaking point came on a night in April. The storm was the worst they had experienced all year, with winds that shook the house and rain that fell in torrents. Rebecca had been watching the front door for hours, knowing the man would come, and come he did. But this time, he didn't stop at the door. Rebecca watched in horror as the man's form began to change. His body seemed to become translucent, and slowly, impossibly, he began to pass through the wooden door. The air in the room grew ice cold, and Rebecca could see her breath as the man's ghostly form materialized in their living room. He stood there, dripping with rain that shouldn't exist, his black eyes fixed on Rebecca. When he spoke, his voice was like the whisper of wind through a graveyard. "I've been waiting so long," he said. "This house, it calls to me. It always has." Rebecca tried to scream, but no sound came. The man moved closer, and she could smell the scent of earth and decay that surrounded him. "You see me because you're like me," he continued. "You understand what this place really is. The others who lived here, they saw me too, eventually, and then they became like me." David burst into the room, awakened by the sudden drop in temperature. He found Rebecca standing frozen in the center of the room, staring at empty air, her lips blue with cold. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" he asked, but she couldn't respond. She was transfixed by the man's presence, by the terrible truth he was revealing. "This house sits on old ground," the man whispered, "ground that has seen death and sorrow for generations. I was the first to die here, long before it was built, shot by a thief on a night much like this one. I've been waiting, watching, calling others to join me." Rebecca finally found her voice. "What do you want from me?" The man's lipless mouth curved into what might have been a smile. "I want you to stop fighting it. I want you to accept what you're becoming. Soon, you'll be standing in the rain with me, waiting for the next one to see us." David grabbed Rebecca's shoulders, shaking her. "There's no one there. You're scaring me." But Rebecca could only stare at the man, understanding flooding through her like ice water. She thought of Mrs. Anderson, who had died in her sleep. She thought of Mr. Anderson, found standing in the rain, catatonic. She thought of all the sleepless nights, all the hours spent watching, waiting. "I won't become like you," she whispered. The man's form began to fade as the rain outside started to slow. "You already have," he said. "You just don't know it yet." And then he was gone, leaving only the scent of wet earth and the sound of Rebecca's ragged breathing. David insisted they move immediately. Within 2 weeks, they had packed their belongings and relocated to an apartment across town. Rebecca felt relief for the first time in months. She began to sleep again, to laugh, to feel human. But the relief was short-lived. On the first rainy night in their new home, Rebecca stood at the window, watching the storm. She meant to go to bed, to put the terrible experience behind her forever. But something kept her there, watching, waiting. And then she saw him. David was in the kitchen, making tea. When he heard Rebecca's sharp intake of breath, he turned to see her standing at the window, perfectly still, rain from the storm somehow dripping from her hair and clothes despite being inside. "Rebecca," he called, but she didn't respond. Outside in the rain, a man stood on the sidewalk, staring up at their new home. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark coat, his face pale in the streetlight, and beside him, translucent but becoming more solid with each passing moment, stood Rebecca. David watched in horror as his wife's reflection in the window showed her standing outside in the rain, while her physical form remained motionless at the window. The man had been right. She was becoming like him, drawn to stand in the rain, to wait and watch for the next person who would see them. In the years that followed, the residents of their old house would report the same phenomenon. A woman and a man standing in the rain, getting closer with each storm. The pattern would repeat, as it had for generations, as it would for generations to come. And on rainy nights, if you knew where to look, you could still see them standing there, waiting patiently for the next person to notice them, to join their eternal vigil in the rain. The rain never stops calling them home, and once you see them, they never stop calling you. The rain was a relentless drumbeat against the windshield, each drop a tiny hammer blow in the inky blackness of the British countryside. Liam gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, his ancient Ford Focus hydroplaning precariously around another sharp bend. Beside him, Chloe chewed her lip, her eyes darting between the road and the flickering navigation on her phone. In the back, Marcus and Olivia were unusually quiet, the usual raucous laughter replaced by the shared tension of the storm. "This is insane," Chloe muttered, her voice barely audible above the deluge. "We should have just stayed at your place, Liam, and miss out on the thrill of a midnight drive to nowhere." Liam attempted a jocular tone, but his voice was strained. He'd been trying to impress Chloe, taking them on this shortcut through a supposedly scenic, but clearly desolate route. Now, every splash of water from the tires felt like a premonition. Suddenly, the headlights cut through a wall of water, illuminating something unexpected. To their left, where the overgrown hedgerows usually pressed in, there was a jagged opening in the earth, barely visible beneath a crumbling stone archway. It was Ashridge Bridge, known more for its local legend than its practical use, but Liam had never noticed this. "Whoa, hold up." Marcus leaned forward, his face pressed against the window. "What's that?" Liam slowed the car, the tires crunching on loose gravel as he pulled over. The archway was old, its stones black with moss and grime, partially obscured by thorny brambles. It looked less like a bridge and more like a forgotten entrance to somewhere sinister. A faded, rusted sign, barely decipherable, warned of danger. "Keep out." "It's a tunnel," Olivia breathed, her voice a hushed whisper. "I've heard stories about a hidden tunnel under Ashridge. No one's supposed to go near it." A chill, colder than the rain, snaked its way up Liam's spine. But then, the challenge in Marcus's eyes caught his. "Anyone brave enough to check it out?" Marcus grinned, a dare in his voice. He knew Liam wouldn't back down. "Are you insane?" Chloe exclaimed, her eyes wide with alarm. "No way. Let's just go." But Liam was already shutting off the engine. The silence that followed was broken only by the furious patter of rain and the distant howl of the wind. He fumbled for his powerful LED flashlight. "Just a quick look," he said, trying to reassure Chloe, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. 5 minutes tops. Olivia, despite her earlier apprehension, was now leaning forward, curiosity battling with fear. "I'll stay in the car with Chloe," she declared, casting a nervous glance at the looming tunnel. Marcus, however, was already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Count me in, mate," he said, a thrill-seeker's glint in his eyes. Armed with a single flashlight, Liam and Marcus stepped out into the downpour. The wind immediately whipped their clothes, chilling them to the bone. The air grew heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something subtly metallic and ancient. As they approached the archway, the rain seemed to lessen, as if the very entrance repelled it. The tunnel yawned before them, a gaping maw of darkness. The beam of Liam's flashlight struggled to penetrate its depths. The walls were rough-hewn stone, dripping with moisture, and the floor was uneven, covered in a thick layer of mud and debris. The air inside was still, unnaturally so, and strangely warm. It felt like holding one's breath. "Creepy," Marcus whispered, his usual bravado slightly muted. Liam took a tentative step inside. The sound of their footsteps was swallowed instantly, leaving only a profound, suffocating quiet. The tunnel stretched on, seemingly endless, disappearing into a void beyond the reach of the flashlight. A faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from the darkness, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in Liam's chest. "Let's just go a little further," Liam suggested, pushing down a rising sense of dread. He told himself it was just the atmosphere, the isolation. They walked deeper, the walls pressing in, the air growing heavier. The beam of light danced across the damp stones, revealing twisted roots that snaked through cracks and strange, dark stains that looked vaguely organic. Liam's mind conjured images of forgotten rituals, of things best left undisturbed. He could feel Marcus's unease radiating beside him. Then, the hum intensified, growing into a low, guttural vibration that seemed to come from all around them, from the very stones themselves. The air grew cold, a sudden, bone-chilling drop in temperature that made their breath plume in the beam of light. Suddenly, a faint scraping sound echoed from deeper within the tunnel, a sound like something dragging itself across rough stone. It was followed by another, closer this time. Liam froze, his heart leaping into his throat. Marcus let out a small gasp. "Did you hear that?" Marcus whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Yeah," Liam managed, his voice barely a croak. He swung the flashlight beam wildly into the darkness ahead, but it revealed nothing but endless black. The scraping sound came again, closer still, and this time it was accompanied by a soft, wet slithering, a putrid, cloying odor, like decay and stagnant water, filled the air, making them gag. "That's enough," Marcus exclaimed, his voice cracking. "We're getting out of here." Liam didn't need convincing. He spun around, stumbling in the mud as he tried to retrace his steps. The thought of what might be lurking in the oppressive darkness behind them spurred him on. They scrambled back, their shoes splashing in the unseen puddles, the hum growing louder, the foul smell intensifying with every frantic step. As they neared the entrance, the hum reached a crescendo, a roaring vibration that threatened to deafen them. The scraping and slithering sounds were directly behind them now, chillingly close. Liam risked a glance over his shoulder, but the darkness was absolute, save for a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift in the shadows, a deeper blackness moving within the already profound gloom. They burst out of the tunnel into the pouring rain, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone and trembling. Chloe and Olivia shrieked as they saw their panicked faces. Get in the car," Liam yelled, fumbling with the car door handle. They piled into the Ford, slamming the door shut as if to seal themselves away from the horrors they'd just encountered. Liam jammed the key into the ignition, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. He slammed the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel, and spun the vehicle around. "What was that?" Chloe demanded, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," Liam gasped, flooring the accelerator. Something was in there. As they sped away, the headlights briefly illuminated the entrance to the forgotten tunnel. And for a split second, just before the car rounded the bend and the tunnel vanished from sight, Liam saw it, not in the tunnel itself, but at its very threshold, just beyond the crumbling archway, where the dense brambles parted slightly. Two pinpricks of dull, amber light glowed faintly in the darkness, like embers in a dying fire. They were low to the ground, almost at eye level with the muddy floor of the tunnel. And as he watched, horrified, they seemed to blink. The car careened down the winding road, tires screeching. But the image was seared into Liam's mind. Those two lights, those ancient, malevolent eyes watching them. "Did you see anything?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. Liam gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "No," he lied, unable to articulate the sheer, primal terror that had gripped him. He knew, with a horrifying certainty, that whatever had been lurking in the forgotten tunnel under Ashridge Bridge was no longer confined to its dark depths. It had followed them out. For the rest of the drive, a suffocating silence filled the car, punctuated only by the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers and the frantic beat of their own hearts. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every rustle of leaves against the windows sounded like a whisper. Liam kept glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those two amber lights in the darkness behind them, drawing ever closer. He drove faster, the Ford straining against the storm, desperately trying to outrun the unknown horror that now felt as real and as close as the rain lashing against the car. They had disturbed something ancient, something that had waited patiently in the dark for an eternity. And now it was awake, and it was coming for them. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of the Victorian house in Portland, Oregon, creating a symphony of darkness that seemed to seep into every corner of the old structure. 16-year-old Emily Matthews pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders as she sat at her desk, trying to concentrate on her chemistry homework. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, and the weatherman on Channel 7 had warned that it would only get worse. Emily's parents, Dr. Robert Matthews and his wife Catherine, had moved to this house 6 months ago when her father accepted a position at Oregon Health Sciences University. The house was beautiful during the day, with its intricate woodwork and tall windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. But at night, especially during storms like this, it transformed into something altogether more sinister. The tapping started at exactly 11:47 p.m. It wasn't the random drumming of rain against the roof that Emily had grown accustomed to. This was different, rhythmic, deliberate. 3 short taps, followed by 2 long ones, then 3 short again. It sounded like someone was walking across the roof, their footsteps careful and measured. Emily looked up from her textbook, her pencil frozen mid-calculation. The tapping continued, moving from the area directly above her bedroom toward the center of the house. She could track its progress by the sound, as if someone was deliberately pacing back and forth up there. "Mom," she called out, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Dad." Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs, and her father appeared in the doorway, his graying hair disheveled from sleep. Behind him, her mother clutched her robe tightly, her face creased with concern. "What is it, sweetheart?" Dr. Matthews asked, stepping into the room. "Do you hear that?" Emily whispered, pointing toward the ceiling. "The tapping. Someone's on the roof." Her parents stood silently for a moment, listening. The tapping had stopped. Only the natural sounds of the storm remained. The whistle of wind through the eaves, the splash of rain against glass, the occasional creak of old wood settling. "It's just the storm, honey," Catherine said gently, moving to sit on the edge of Emily's bed. Old houses like this make all sorts of sounds during bad weather. The wind can make it seem like there are footsteps when it's really just branches or debris hitting the roof. But it wasn't random, Emily insisted. It was like a pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again, over and over. Dr. Matthews walked to the window and peered out into the darkness. The rain was coming down so hard that visibility was nearly 0. "I don't see anything out there. And honestly, who would be crazy enough to be on a roof in this weather?" The tapping resumed the moment her father finished speaking. This time, all 3 of them heard it clearly. The same pattern, the same deliberate rhythm. But now it seemed to be coming from multiple locations across the roof, as if more than one person was up there. Dr. Matthews' face went pale. "I'll check it out," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Probably just a tree branch that's gotten lodged up there. I'll go take a look." "Robert, no." Catherine grabbed his arm. "It's dangerous out there. The roof will be slippery, and with this visibility." "I'll be careful," he assured her, but Emily could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I'll just do a quick check around the house." As her father left the room, Emily noticed that the tapping seemed to follow his movements. When he went downstairs, the sounds moved toward the front of the house. When she heard the front door open and close, the tapping stopped entirely. For 20 minutes, there was silence except for the storm. Emily and her mother sat together on the bed, listening intently. Catherine tried to make conversation about school, about Emily's upcoming drama audition, about anything that might distract from the growing tension in the room. Then they heard Dr. Matthews calling from outside, his voice barely audible through the storm. "Catherine, get the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Now." Catherine rushed downstairs, while Emily remained frozen in her room. The tapping had started again, but now it was different. Faster, more urgent. It sounded like someone was running across the roof, their footsteps creating a frantic rhythm that made Emily's heart race. When her mother returned with the flashlight, her face was white with fear. "Your father found something," she said quietly. "Footprints in the mud around the house. But they don't lead away from the house, Emily. They just stop." The tapping above them grew louder, more insistent. Now it sounded like fists pounding against the roof from the inside, as if someone was trapped in the attic and desperately trying to get out. Dr. Matthews burst through the front door, soaked to the bone and trembling. "We need to call the police," he said without preamble. "There are definitely footprints out there, recent ones, and He paused, running his hand through his wet hair. There the ladder, an old wooden ladder leaning against the back of the house. It wasn't there before. Emily felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the storm. Dad, the sounds. They're getting louder. Indeed, the tapping had evolved into something more aggressive. It sounded like someone was trying to break through the roof itself, creating a rhythmic pounding that seemed to shake the entire house. Catherine grabbed the cordless phone from Emily's nightstand, but when she pressed the talk button, there was no dial tone. "The lines must be down from the storm," she said, her voice tight with panic. Dr. Matthews pulled out his cell phone, but the screen showed no signal. "Same here. We're completely cut off." The pounding above them suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. Emily found herself holding her breath, waiting for whatever would come next. Then they heard it, a voice, muffled but unmistakably human, calling from somewhere above them. "Help me," it said. "Please help me." The voice sounded young, female, and desperate. Emily's first instinct was to respond, to call out that they would help. But something in the tone made her hesitate. There was something wrong with the voice. It was too clear, too perfect, as if it were being played through a speaker rather than coming from a real person. "Emily," the voice called again, and this time it was definitely coming from directly above her bedroom. "Emily, I need you to come up here. I'm hurt." Emily's blood ran cold. The voice knew her name. But how was that possible? If someone was genuinely trapped on their roof, how would they know who she was? Dr. Matthews moved protectively in front of his wife and daughter. "Nobody goes anywhere," he said firmly. "We stay together, and we wait this out." But the voice continued, becoming more insistent. "Emily, please. I can see you through the window. I know you can hear me. I'm bleeding. I need help." Emily looked toward her window, but the curtains were drawn. There was no way for someone on the roof to see into her room. The inconsistency made her stomach churn with fear. "It's not real," she whispered. "Whatever's up there, it's not real." As if responding to her words, the voice changed. It became deeper, more guttural, losing its human quality entirely. "Emily," it growled, "come up here. Now." The pounding resumed, but now it was accompanied by a scraping sound, as if someone was dragging something heavy across the roof. The sounds moved in a circle around the house, creating a pattern that seemed almost ritualistic. Catherine grabbed Emily's hand. "We need to get out of here," she said. "Now." But as they started toward the bedroom door, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming up from the first floor. Someone was in the house. Dr. Matthews quickly closed and locked the bedroom door, then pushed Emily's desk chair under the handle. "The window," he whispered. "We'll go out the window." Emily's bedroom was on the second floor, but there was a section of roof just below her window that led to a trellis. It would be dangerous in the storm, but it was their only option. Dr. Matthews struggled with the window latch, which seemed to be stuck. As he worked, the footsteps on the stairs grew closer. They could hear whoever it was moving down the hallway, checking each room. The footsteps stopped outside Emily's door. The doorknob turned slowly, testing the lock. When it wouldn't open, whoever was on the other side began to push against the door. The chair held, but Emily could see the door flexing under the pressure. Finally, the window latch gave way, and cold, wet air rushed into the room. Dr. Matthews helped Emily climb out onto the rain-slicked roof section, while Catherine followed close behind. The storm was even worse outside than it had sounded from inside. The wind whipped Emily's hair across her face, and the rain stung her skin like needles. She could barely see the trellis that was supposed to be their escape route. Behind them, they heard the bedroom door finally give way. The chair clattered to the floor, and heavy footsteps entered the room. Dr. Matthews went first, carefully making his way down the trellis. The old wood creaked ominously under his weight, but it held. Catherine followed, her movements hampered by her robe and slippers. Emily was about to follow when she heard the voice again, this time coming from right behind her. "Where are you going, Emily?" She turned to see a figure silhouetted in her bedroom window. It was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark coat. In the brief flashes of lightning, she could see that where its face should be, there was only shadow. "Jump!" her father called from below. Emily jumped. Without thinking, Emily leaped from the roof toward the trellis. Her hands caught the wet wood, but her grip was slipping. She looked down to see her parents reaching up for her, their faces white with terror. Above her, the figure was climbing out of the window, moving with an unnatural fluidity that made Emily's skin crawl. It didn't seem to be affected by the storm at all. Emily's hands finally lost their grip, and she fell the last few feet into her father's arms. Together, the three of them ran toward their car, which was parked in the driveway. Dr. Matthews fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking from cold and fear. As he finally got the car started, Emily looked back at the house. The figure was standing in her bedroom window, watching them. But now there were more figures visible in other windows throughout the house, dark silhouettes that seemed to be multiplying. They drove through the storm toward the nearest neighbor's house, 3 miles away. Emily kept looking back, expecting to see the figures following them, but the darkness was too complete to make out anything. When they finally reached the Johnsons' house, their elderly neighbors were shocked to see them soaked and terrified on their doorstep. Mrs. Johnson immediately called the police, while Mr. Johnson gave them dry clothes and hot coffee. The police arrived an hour later, along with a fire truck and an ambulance. They searched the Matthews house thoroughly, but found no sign of intruders. The ladder Dr. Matthews had seen was gone, and there were no footprints in the mud around the house. The storm had washed away any evidence. Sometimes storms can play tricks on people, Officer Bradley explained to the family. The sounds, the shadows, the stress of being isolated. It can make people imagine things that aren't there. But Emily knew what she had seen. The figure in her window had been real, even if it hadn't been human. And the voice that had called her name had known things it shouldn't have known. They stayed at the Johnsons' house for the rest of the night. The next morning, when the storm had passed, they cautiously returned to their house. Everything appeared normal. There was no damage to the roof, no sign that anyone had been there. But Emily noticed something that made her blood run cold. On her bedroom ceiling, directly above where her bed was positioned, there were scratches in the plaster, deep gouges that formed a pattern, 3 short lines, followed by 2 long ones, then 3 short again, the same pattern as the tapping she had heard. Dr. Matthews had the scratches painted over that same day, and the family never spoke about what had happened during the storm. But Emily knew that whatever had been on their roof that night was still there, waiting for the next storm, waiting for the next opportunity to call her name. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the rain was just beginning to fall, she would hear it again. The familiar tapping that meant something was walking across the roof above her head, something that knew her name and wanted her to come outside. Emily learned to sleep with headphones on, but even through the music, she could sometimes hear that voice calling to her from the darkness above, patient and persistent, waiting for her to finally answer. The rain would always return to Portland, and with it, the sounds on the rooftop would resume their eternal vigil, tapping out their coded message to anyone brave enough to listen. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. The pattern never changed, and neither did the voice that knew her name. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in Millbrook, a forgotten village nestled deep in the Canadian wilderness. Emma Richardson pressed her face against the cold window of the local diner, watching the relentless downpour transform the dirt roads into muddy rivers. As a journalist for the Toronto Herald, she had covered her share of strange stories, but nothing quite like this. "You shouldn't have come here, miss," wheezed Harold Blackwood, the elderly diner owner, as he refilled her coffee cup with shaking hands, especially not during storm season. Emma pulled out her digital recorder and set it on the scratched Formica table. "Tell me about the radio tower, Mr. Blackwood, the one on Ravens Hill." The old man's face went pale, and he glanced nervously at the other patrons. The diner fell silent except for the drumming of rain on the tin roof. Everyone was staring at her now, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pity. "That tower's been dead for 40 years, Harold whispered. leaning closer. Ever since the incident, Emma had done her research before making the 6-hour drive from Toronto. The radio tower had been built in 1952 to serve the small logging community. But in 1984, during the worst storm in the region's recorded history, something had gone terribly wrong. The official report mentioned equipment failure and electrical fires, but the locals told a different story. What kind of incident? Emma pressed. Harold's weathered hands trembled as he wiped down the counter. The storm that year, it wasn't natural, lasted 2 weeks straight. The radio tower started picking up voices, not from other stations, mind you, voices from the storm itself. A younger woman with prematurely gray hair looked up from her pie. My grandmother was the radio operator that night. She said the voices were calling names of people who lived in the village. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What happened to your grandmother? She was found 3 days later, frozen solid at the base of the tower. But here's the thing. The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. The storm had stopped the night before. It was 70 degrees outside. As if summoned by their conversation, a crack of thunder shook the building. The lights flickered, and for a moment, Emma could have sworn she heard something else mixed in with the thunder, a voice, faint and distorted, calling her name. You heard it too, didn't you? Harold asked, his eyes wide with terror. Emma packed her equipment and headed for the door. I need to see that tower. Don't go up there tonight, the gray-haired woman called after her. The storm's getting worse. But Emma was already pushing through the door into the driving rain. She had come too far to turn back now. The road to Ravens Hill was barely more than a muddy track winding through dense pine forest. Emma's rental car struggled against the slick terrain, its headlights cutting weak beams through the darkness. The windshield wipers worked frantically, but the rain was coming down too hard to see more than a few feet ahead. 20 minutes into the drive, the radio crackled to life. Emma hadn't even turned it on. Static filled the car, punctuated by brief moments of clarity where she could almost make out words. She reached for the dial to turn it off, but before she could touch it, a voice emerged from the white noise. Emma Richardson. Her blood turned to ice. The voice was hollow, echoing, as if it were coming from somewhere very far away, or very deep underground. Turn back, Emma, while you still can. She yanked the radio knob, but the static continued. The voice grew clearer, more insistent. The storm remembers everything, every name, every soul it's claimed. Emma pressed harder on the gas pedal. Whatever was happening, she needed to reach the tower. She was a journalist, damn it. She dealt in facts, not ghost stories. The radio fell silent just as she reached the base of Ravens Hill. The tower loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of rusted metal reaching into the storm clouds like a giant's finger. Lightning illuminated its twisted frame, and Emma could see that parts of it had been damaged by decades of neglect and weather. She parked the car and grabbed her equipment bag. The rain immediately soaked through her jacket, and the wind threatened to knock her off her feet. But she pressed forward, her flashlight beam dancing across the muddy ground. The tower's base was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A sign warned of electrical hazards and trespassing violations, but the gate hung open, creaking in the wind. Emma squeezed through and approached the small concrete building at the tower's foundation. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay and ozone. Emma's flashlight revealed banks of ancient radio equipment, their dials and switches corroded with age. Cables snaked across the floor like dead vines, and water dripped steadily from the ceiling. In the center of the room sat an old broadcast console, its microphone still connected to the tower above. Despite the building's abandonment, the equipment hummed with a faint electrical current. Emma set up her recording equipment and began documenting what she saw. As she worked, she became aware of a strange sensation, the feeling of being watched. She turned her flashlight toward the corners of the room, but found nothing except shadows and cobwebs. Then she heard it again, the voice from the radio. But this time it wasn't coming from her car. It was coming from the broadcast console. Emma, you came. The microphone's red light flickered to life. Emma approached it cautiously, her recorder in hand. "Who are you?" she asked. The static cleared, and multiple voices began speaking at once. Men, women, children, all talking over each other in a cacophony of whispers and screams. "We are the storm," they said in unison. "We are the voices in the rain." Emma's hands shook as she held the recorder closer to the microphone. "What do you want?" "To tell our story. To be remembered." The voices began to separate, each one distinct and clear. Emma recognized some of them from her research. Names from the village records, people who had died during storms over the past 40 years. Margaret Whitmore, age 34. Struck by lightning, August 15th, 1987. Thomas Chun, age 19. Drowned in flash flood, June 3rd, 1994. Rebecca Sullivan, age 8. Hypothermia, October 12th, 2003. The list went on and on. Each voice recounted their death in monotone detail, as if reading from a coroner's report. Emma realized she was documenting something unprecedented, evidence of life after death, proof that consciousness could survive beyond the physical body. But as she listened, she began to notice something disturbing. The dates were getting more recent. The voices were getting younger. Daniel Morrison, age 22. Car accident during storm, March 18th, 2019. Lisa Hamilton, age 31. Struck by falling tree, September 7th, 2021. James Wright, age 16. Lightning strike, July 4th, 2023. Emma's blood ran cold. The most recent death had been less than 2 years ago. The tower might be abandoned, but something was still active here, still hungry. "Why do you collect their voices?" she asked. The chorus of the dead grew louder, more agitated. The storm feeds on fear, on pain, on the last moments of life. We are its harvest. Thunder crashed overhead, and the building shook violently. Emma's flashlight flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. The only light came from the red glow of the microphone and the occasional flash of lightning through the broken windows. "But you're different, Emma," the voices continued. "You came here willingly. You sought us out." "I'm just a journalist," Emma said, backing toward the door. "I'm here to tell your story." "Yes," the voices hissed, "and now you'll become part of it." The temperature in the room began to drop rapidly. Emma's breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the equipment. She could hear the storm intensifying outside, the wind howling like a living thing. "The storm is coming for you, Emma. It's been waiting for someone like you. Someone who would come here alone, in the dark, during the worst weather in decades." Emma fumbled for her equipment, trying to pack it quickly, but the voices continued their relentless assault on her sanity. "You feel it, don't you? The cold creeping into your bones, the electricity in the air, the way the rain sounds like whispers." She did feel it. The cold was spreading through her body, and she could hear something in the storm outside. Not just wind and rain, but voices, hundreds of them, calling her name. "Emma, Emma, join us." She ran for the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. The handle was ice cold and wouldn't turn. She was trapped. The voices grew louder, more insistent. The radio equipment began sparking and smoking, filling the room with the acrid smell of burning electronics. Lightning struck the tower above, and the entire building was illuminated in brilliant white light. In that moment of clarity, Emma saw them. Translucent figures standing around the room, their eyes hollow and their mouths open in silent screams. The faces of everyone who had died in the storms over the past 40 years, all staring at her with desperate hunger. "Tell our story," they pleaded. "Make them remember us." Emma pulled out a recorder and began speaking, even as the cold seeped deeper into her bones. "This is Emma Richardson, reporting from the abandoned radio tower on Ravens Hill. I've discovered evidence of paranormal activity related to storm deaths in the area dating back to 1984. The spirits pressed closer, their forms becoming more solid. Emma could feel their desperate need for recognition, for someone to acknowledge their existence. The victims claimed to be trapped by some kind of entity that feeds on fear and death during storms. They're not malevolent, they're prisoners. Lightning struck again, and the building shook violently. Equipment fell from shelves, and sparks flew from the radio console. But Emma kept recording, even as her fingers began to turn blue from the cold. The entity uses the radio tower as a conduit, somehow drawing power from the electrical activity during storms. It's been collecting souls for decades, using them to grow stronger. The temperature dropped even further. Emma's words came out in stuttering gasps as hypothermia set in. The spirits were fading now, their energy being drawn away by something else, something darker. If anyone finds this recording, Emma whispered, stay away from Ravens Hill during storms. The entity is still active, still hunting. A new voice filled the room, deeper and more sinister than the others. It seemed to come from the storm itself, from the very air around her. Thank you, Emma. You've served your purpose. The cold reached her heart, and Emma felt herself falling. Her recorder clattered to the floor, still running. The red light of the microphone pulsed like a heartbeat as her vision faded. Emma Richardson, age 29. Hypothermia, July 18th, 2025. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun shone brightly on Millbrook, and the flooding began to recede. A search party found Emma's car at the base of Ravens Hill, but there was no sign of the journalist herself. 3 days later, a hiker discovered her body in the abandoned radio building, frozen solid despite the warm weather. The authorities ruled it death by exposure, though they couldn't explain how someone could freeze to death in July. Emma's recording equipment was found scattered around the room, but the memory cards were corrupted. The only thing that remained was a single audio file, filled with static and distorted voices. But sometimes, on stormy nights, when the wind howls through the trees and the rain pounds against the windows, the people of Millbrook claim they can hear a new voice mixed in with the others. A woman's voice, calling from the radio tower on Ravens Hill. This is Emma Richardson, reporting from the storm. We are the voices in the rain. We are the storm's harvest. And we are still here, waiting for the next soul brave enough to seek us out. The tower stands empty now, its rusty frame reaching toward the sky, like a monument to the dead. But the locals know better than to venture near it during storms. They've learned to turn off their radios when the thunder starts, and they warn visitors to stay away from Ravens Hill, because the storm remembers everything, every name, every soul it's claimed, and it's always hungry for more. The rain hammered against the windshield of Marcus Thompson's beat-up Honda Civic as he sat in the parking lot of Tony's Pizza Palace, staring at his phone screen. The clock read 11:47 p.m., and he was supposed to clock out at midnight. Just 13 more minutes, and he could finally head home to his cramped apartment in downtown Portland, Oregon. The delivery app pinged with its familiar chime, and Marcus groaned. One last order. The address read 1847 Elmwood Drive, and the customer name was listed as R. Blackwood. The order was simple enough. 1 large pepperoni pizza and a bottle of Coke. Nothing unusual there. Marcus had been delivering food for almost 2 years now, working his way through college, and he knew every street in this part of the city like the back of his hand. But as he punched the address into his GPS, something felt off. The system seemed to struggle for a moment, the screen flickering before finally displaying a route that took him into the older residential area on the outskirts of town. He grabbed the insulated bag containing the pizza and headed out into the storm. The rain was coming down so hard that his wipers could barely keep up, and the streets were nearly deserted. The only sounds were the rhythmic thump of the wipers and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. As Marcus drove deeper into the residential area, the houses began to thin out. The streetlights became fewer and farther between, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and writhe in the storm. He passed a few houses with darkened windows, their lawns overgrown, and mailboxes tilted at odd angles. The GPS directed him to turn left onto Elmwood Drive, but when he reached the intersection, his headlights illuminated a rusted street sign that was barely legible. The letters were faded and partially covered by ivy, but he could just make out Elmwood Doctor. He turned onto the narrow street, which was barely wide enough for his car. The houses here were different from the ones in the main residential area. They were older, much older, with Victorian-style architecture that seemed to loom over the street. Most of them appeared to be abandoned, with broken windows and sagging roofs. The few that showed signs of life had dim lights flickering behind heavy curtains. Marcus checked his phone again. According to the GPS, he should be approaching 1847. Elmwood Drive any moment now. But as he drove slowly down the street, peering through the rain at the house numbers, something wasn't right. He passed 1839, then 1841, then 1843, and then nothing. The next house was numbered 1851. He pulled over and double-checked the address on his phone. 1847, Elmwood Drive. It was definitely the right street, but the house simply wasn't there. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a wrought iron fence that looked like it had been there for decades. Marcus was about to call the customer when his phone rang. The caller ID showed the same number that had placed the order. "Hello, this is Marcus from Tony's Pizza. I'm having trouble finding your address. I'm on Elmwood Drive, but I can't seem to locate 1847. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a voice that sounded distant and hollow. "You're at the right place, Marcus. Look closer." The line went dead. Marcus sat in his car for a moment, staring at the empty lot. The rain continued to pound against his windshield, and he was starting to feel uneasy. He'd had difficult deliveries before, but this was different. Something about the voice on the phone had sent a chill down his spine. He decided to get out and take a closer look. Maybe there was a house number he'd missed, or perhaps the customer lived in one of the adjacent houses and had given him the wrong address. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked through his jacket within seconds, and the wind whipped around him as he approached the iron fence. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the overgrown lot. But as he looked closer, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There, barely visible through the weeds and debris, were the remains of a foundation. Stone blocks arranged in a rectangular pattern, covered in moss and partially buried under years of accumulated dirt and fallen leaves. This had been a house once, but it looked like it had been gone for a very long time. Marcus was about to turn back to his car when he noticed something else. In the center of where the house would have been, there was a set of concrete steps leading up to nothing, just empty air. But at the base of the steps, almost hidden by the overgrown grass, was a small metal plaque. He knelt down and brushed away the dirt and debris. The plaque read, 1847, Elmwood Drive, built 1892, destroyed by fire 1953. A house that had been destroyed nearly 70 years ago. But someone had just ordered a pizza to be delivered here, and that someone had known his name. Marcus stood up quickly, his heart racing. He needed to get out of here. This was clearly some kind of prank, or maybe someone was playing a sick joke on him. He turned to head back to his car, but as he did, he heard something that made him freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from behind him. He spun around, his flashlight beam sweeping across the empty lot. There was no one there, just the ruins of the old foundation and the concrete steps leading nowhere. But the footsteps continued, getting closer. Marcus backed toward his car, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his keys. The footsteps were getting louder now, and he could hear them splashing through the puddles that had formed in the uneven ground of the lot. He reached his car and yanked the door open, diving into the driver's seat. As he slammed the door and hit the lock button, he looked back at the lot through his rearview mirror. For just a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing at the bottom of the concrete steps. A tall, thin silhouette in what looked like an old-fashioned coat. But when he turned around to look directly, there was nothing there. Marcus started the engine and began to back out of the street, but his phone rang again. The same number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "You forgot something, Marcus." The voice was clearer now, but it still had that strange, hollow quality. "You forgot to deliver the pizza. Listen, I don't know who you are, but this isn't funny. The house doesn't exist. It burned down in 1953. There was a long pause, and then the voice spoke again. I've been waiting for my pizza for a very long time, Marcus. A very long time. And I'm quite hungry. Marcus ended the call and threw his phone onto the passenger seat. He had to get out of here. Whatever this was, he wanted no part of it. He accelerated down Elmwood Drive, eager to reach the main road and leave this nightmare behind. But as he drove, he noticed something in his rearview mirror that made his blood turn to ice. The figure was following him. Not running, not walking quickly, just maintaining that same slow, deliberate pace. But somehow, impossibly, it was keeping up with his car. Marcus pressed harder on the accelerator, and his speedometer climbed to 30, then 40, then 50 miles per hour. The narrow street wasn't meant for these speeds, and he had to fight to keep control of the car in the rain. But when he checked his mirror again, the figure was still there, still walking at that same measured pace, still somehow keeping up. He reached the end of Elmwood Drive and took a hard right onto the main road, tires screeching against the wet asphalt. He didn't slow down until he was several blocks away, and when he finally checked his mirror again, the figure was gone. Marcus pulled into a 24-hour gas station and sat in the parking lot, his hands still shaking. He needed to calm down, to think rationally about what had just happened. Maybe he'd been working too many late shifts. Maybe the stress of school and work was getting to him, making him imagine things. He looked at the pizza bag on the seat next to him. The order was still there, still warm. He should probably just take it back to the restaurant and explain what had happened. Tony would understand. These things happen sometimes in the delivery business. But as he reached for the bag, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the same number that had called him twice. "Thank you for the pizza, Marcus. It was delicious. I'll be sure to leave you a good review." Marcus stared at the message, his mind racing. He looked at the pizza bag again, and his heart nearly stopped. The bag was empty. The pizza was gone, along with the bottle of Coke. He fumbled with the zipper, checking every compartment, but there was nothing there. The food had vanished without a trace. Another text message arrived. "Oh, and Marcus, you might want to check your tip." With trembling hands, Marcus opened his delivery app to check the order details. The delivery had been marked as complete, and the customer had left a tip of $18.47. $18.47, the address of the house that didn't exist. Marcus sat in his car for a long time, staring at his phone screen. The rain had started to lighten, and the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear on the horizon. He thought about driving home, about pretending that none of this had happened, but he knew he would never be able to forget this night. He started his car and drove slowly back toward town, taking the long way to avoid Elmwood Drive. As he passed through the residential area, he noticed something that made him pull over again. There, in the window of a house he'd passed earlier, was a newspaper clipping taped to the glass. The headline was barely visible through the rain-streaked window, but Marcus could just make out the words, "Local family perishes in house fire, 1953. Below the headline was a grainy black and white photograph of a house, the same Victorian-style architecture he'd seen on Elmwood Drive, and standing in front of the house, barely visible in the old photograph, was a tall, thin figure in a long coat, the same figure he'd seen in his rearview mirror. Marcus drove home as the sun began to rise over Portland, but he knew he would never work another late shift again. Some deliveries, he realized, were meant for places that existed in a different time, a different world, and some customers had been waiting much longer than anyone could imagine. He never told anyone about what had happened that night on Elmwood Drive, but sometimes, late at night when the rain was falling hard against his window, he would get calls from unknown numbers, and sometimes, if he was foolish enough to answer, he would hear that same hollow voice asking about a pizza delivery. He always hung up immediately, but the calls never stopped coming, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Marcus knew that Blackwood was still waiting, still hungry, still expecting his next delivery to arrive right on time. The rain continued to fall on the empty lot where 1847 Elmwood Drive used to stand, washing away the footprints that appeared there every night at 11:47 p.m., when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin, and the hungry ghosts of the past placed their orders for one last delivery that that would never truly be their last. The old Victorian house on Elm Street had been in the Henderson family for 3 generations. Marcus Henderson, a software engineer from Toronto, had inherited it from his grandmother 6 months ago. He'd moved in with his wife Emma, a freelance graphic designer, and their 8-year-old daughter Lily. The house came with its quirks: creaky floors, drafty windows, and an ancient television antenna that Marcus kept meaning to remove from the roof. It was a Tuesday evening in October when the first incident occurred. Rain pelted the windows of their cozy living room as the family settled in for dinner. The old CRT television in the corner had been turned off for hours, but as thunder rumbled overhead, the screen suddenly flickered to life. "Did you turn that on?" Emma asked, looking up from her plate of pasta. Marcus shook his head, reaching for the remote. It must be some electrical interference from the storm. But as he pressed the power button, the screen didn't go dark. Instead, it showed a grainy image of their own living room, the same room they were sitting in. The timestamp in the corner read 3 hours into the future. "That's weird," Marcus muttered, pressing the button again. This time, the TV shut off properly. Emma laughed nervously. "Maybe it's picking up some old security camera footage or something." They forgot about it until the next rainy evening. This time, Marcus was working late in his home office when he heard the familiar crackle of the television turning on downstairs. He found Emma and Lily staring at the screen in confusion. "Dad, look," Lily pointed excitedly. "It's showing our kitchen." On the screen, a figure moved through their kitchen, someone wearing Marcus's favorite blue sweater. The person was making coffee, going through the exact motions Marcus performed every morning. But the timestamp showed 6:47 a.m. tomorrow, and it was currently 8:30 p.m. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered, but even as he spoke, he recognized his own mannerisms, his own way of moving. It was definitely him on the screen. The next morning at exactly 6:47 a.m., Marcus found himself in the kitchen, reaching for his coffee mug. He froze, remembering the previous night's vision, fighting against an inexplicable compulsion. He deliberately chose tea instead, but his hand moved automatically to the coffee, performing the exact sequence they'd witnessed on the television. Emma appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "You made coffee," she said quietly, "just like on the TV." "I tried to make tea," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I couldn't stop myself." The incidents became more frequent as autumn progressed. Every time rain struck the old antenna, the television would spring to life, showing glimpses of their future selves. Sometimes it was mundane, Emma watering plants, Lily playing with her toys. Other times, it was more disturbing. One stormy night, they watched Marcus having a heated argument with someone on the phone, his face red with anger. The timestamp showed the next afternoon. When the call came the following day, a work colleague questioning his latest project, Marcus found himself saying the exact words he'd heard himself speak on the television, his anger rising despite his attempts to remain calm. "It's like we're trapped in a script," Emma said one evening as they watched themselves on the screen. In the grainy footage, she was packing suitcases, tears streaming down her face. "This is showing tomorrow night." "Maybe we can change it," Marcus suggested desperately. "Maybe if we know what's coming, we can do something different." But they were learning that knowledge of the future was more curse than blessing. The more they tried to alter what they'd seen, the more inevitable it seemed to become. Their attempts to avoid the predicted events only seemed to ensure they happened exactly as shown. The breaking point came during a particularly violent thunderstorm in November. The television flickered on, but this time, the image was different. Instead of their house, it showed the basement, a part of their home they rarely used. The timestamp read 2 hours into the future. On the screen, they watched themselves descending the basement stairs, but their movements were wrong. They walked with jerky, unnatural motions, like marionettes being controlled by an unseen puppeteer. Their faces were blank, emotionless. "We're not going down there," Emma said firmly. "We'll stay right here together." But even as she spoke, Marcus felt the familiar compulsion beginning. His legs started moving toward the basement door, and he couldn't stop them. Emma and Lily followed, their faces slack, their eyes empty. The basement was darker than usual, filled with shadows that seemed to move independently of their flashlight beams. In the center of the room, they found something that made Marcus's blood run cold. A collection of old television sets, all different models from different decades. Each screen showed a different scene, but all featured the same family, themselves. One screen showed Marcus as a child, playing in this very basement. Another showed Emma, before they'd met, walking through the house as if she belonged there. A third showed Lily, but she was older, maybe 16, standing in the same spot where they now stood. "We've been here before," Emma whispered, her voice hollow. "All of us. We've always been here." The screens began to change, showing more scenes. Marcus saw himself in the basement as a teenager, then as a young adult. Emma appeared in footage from before their marriage, before they'd even met. And Lily was there in scenes that predated her birth. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. They weren't just seeing the future, they were seeing the past, too. The house, the antenna, the storm-triggered television. It was all part of something larger, something that had been drawing them here, generation after generation. The antenna, Marcus gasped. It's not just picking up signals, it's creating them, making us. He couldn't finish the sentence. On the screens around them, they could see their own faces, but older, weathered by years of the same realization. In one screen, an elderly Marcus was explaining the truth to a young man who looked exactly like him, perhaps his son or grandson. "The loop," Emma said, understanding flooding her voice. "We're part of the loop." The television screens began to flicker more rapidly, showing scene after scene of their lives, past, present, and future. They saw themselves moving into the house, saw their confusion at the first incident, saw this very moment playing out on infinite screens in infinite basements. Above them, thunder rolled across the sky, and rain struck the antenna with renewed force. The screens went white for a moment, then cleared to show the living room upstairs. On the television, they watched their own family sitting down to dinner, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The timestamp showed yesterday. Marcus tried to move, to run, to break free from whatever force held them in place, but his body wouldn't respond. None of them could move. They could only watch as the screens showed their endless cycle, their eternal return to this moment of discovery. In the living room above, the television turned on by itself. On its screen, a family sat down to dinner, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The rain continued to fall, striking the antenna with rhythmic precision. And in the basement, 3 figures stood motionless, their eyes reflecting the light of dozens of screens. The Henderson family had finally learned the truth about their inherited home. They were not its owners. They were its prisoners, caught in a loop that had been playing for generations. And somewhere in Toronto, a young couple was looking at real estate listings, drawn inexplicably to a Victorian house on Elm Street. The rain fell steadily. The antenna conducted its ancient purpose, and the televisions continued their endless broadcast. In the basement, the screen showed a new family moving in, carrying boxes and dreams, unaware that their every move was being watched by empty-eyed figures in the shadows below. The loop continued, as it always had, as it always would. The static in the rain had found its purpose, and the Henderson family had found their eternal home. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 days in the small town of Millbrook, nestled in the Canadian Rockies. Dr. Emma Thompson pulled her car into the driveway of her Victorian home, exhausted after another long shift at the hospital. The weather forecast promised no relief. Another week of storms was heading their way. As she fumbled with her keys at the front door, Emma noticed her neighbor Mrs. Henderson's house was completely dark. Strange, she thought. The elderly woman usually kept her porch light on during storms. Emma made a mental note to check on her tomorrow. Inside, Emma poured herself a glass of wine and settled into her favorite armchair by the fireplace. The rain drummed against the windows with increasing intensity, and thunder rolled across the mountains like a freight train. She was just beginning to relax when she heard it. a soft knocking at her front door. Emma glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Who could be visiting at this hour, especially in such terrible weather? The knocking came again, more insistent this time. She set down her wine and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. Standing on her porch was a little girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, wearing a bright yellow raincoat. The child's hood was pulled up, casting her face in shadow, but Emma could see water dripping from the coat's edges. The poor thing looked absolutely soaked. "Oh, my goodness," Emma whispered, immediately unlatching the door. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Are you lost?" The little girl looked up, and Emma's breath caught. The child's eyes were an unusual pale blue, almost colorless, and seemed to reflect the porch light in an odd way. Her skin was unnaturally pale, with a slight bluish tint that Emma's medical training told her could indicate hypothermia. "I'm so cold," the girl said in a small, trembling voice. "Can I come in? Please, I need help." Emma's maternal instincts kicked in immediately. Without hesitation, she stepped aside and ushered the child into her warm home. "Of course, honey. Let's get you dried off and warmed up. Where are your parents? Do you live nearby?" The girl stood dripping on the hardwood floor, water pooling around her small yellow boots. She didn't answer Emma's questions, instead looking around the house with those strange, pale eyes. "I'm Dr. Thompson," Emma said gently, kneeling down to the girl's level. "What's your name? How did you end up out there in the storm?" "My name is Lucy," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I got lost. I've been walking for so long." Emma's heart ached for the child. "Well, Lucy, let's get you out of those wet clothes. I might have something that fits you, and then we'll call your parents or the police to help find them." As Emma reached for Lucy's hood to help her remove the raincoat, the girl stepped back sharply. "No," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "I need to keep it on. I'm still so cold." Emma found this odd but didn't want to press the frightened child. "Okay, that's fine, but let me at least get you a towel and some hot cocoa. You must be freezing." She led Lucy to the living room, where the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls. Lucy sat on the edge of the couch, still dripping, her hands folded in her lap. She stared into the fire with an intensity that made Emma uncomfortable. In the kitchen, Emma heated milk for cocoa while trying to piece together what might have happened. There were no missing child reports she was aware of, and she knew most of the families in their small town. Where could this girl have come from? When she returned with the steaming mug, Lucy was still sitting exactly as Emma had left her, staring into the flames. She hadn't moved an inch. "Here you go, sweetheart," Emma said, offering the cocoa. "This should help warm you up." Lucy looked at the mug, but didn't take it. "I don't drink that anymore," she said quietly. Emma set the mug on the coffee table, concerned. The girl's behavior was becoming increasingly strange. "Lucy, I really need to call someone. Your parents must be worried sick. Can you tell me your last name? Or where you live?" Lucy finally turned those pale eyes toward Emma. "I don't remember," she said. "I've been walking for so long, from house to house. People are usually so kind to let me in." There was something about the way she said those last words that sent a chill down Emma's spine. She tried to shake off the feeling, reminding herself that trauma could make children behave strangely. "Well, why don't you rest here while I make some calls?" Emma said. "I'll see if I can find out where you belong." Emma went to the kitchen and dialed the police station. Officer Bradley Matthews answered on the second ring. "Brad, it's Emma Thompson. I have a situation here. A little girl showed up at my door in the storm. She says she's lost, but something seems off about her story." "What do you mean off?" Bradley asked. "She's soaking wet, wearing a yellow raincoat, and she won't tell me her last name or where she lives. She seems traumatized, but there's something else. I can't put my finger on it." There was a pause on the other end. "Emma, did you say a yellow raincoat?" "Yes, why? We've had some reports lately. People going missing after letting in a child during storms. Started about a month ago. Mrs. Peterson from Elm Street was the first. Her neighbor saw a little girl in a yellow raincoat knocking on doors that night." Emma's blood ran cold. Are you saying this child is dangerous? I'm saying you need to be very careful. I'm heading over now, but Emma, whatever you do, don't let her leave with you still inside. Emma hung up the phone, her hands shaking. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the block, just in case, and slowly walked back toward the living room. As she approached, she could hear Lucy's voice, but it sounded different now, older, more mature. And Mrs. Henderson was so sweet. Lucy was saying to someone, she made me tea and let me sit by her fire. She even offered to let me spend the night. Emma peered around the corner. Lucy was still sitting alone on the couch, but she was talking as if someone else was there. Her voice had changed completely. It was no longer the frightened whisper of a lost child, but something else entirely. Who are you talking to, Lucy? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Lucy turned, and Emma gasped. The girl's eyes were no longer pale blue. They were completely black, like deep holes in her face. And her skin, which had been pale before, now had a distinctly gray tint. I was just telling them about all the nice people who've helped me, Lucy said, her voice now carrying an odd echo. Like Mr. Johnson from Pine Street. He was so worried about me being alone in the storm. He insisted I stay the night. Emma gripped the knife tighter. Where are they now, Lucy? All these people who helped you. Lucy smiled, and Emma saw that her teeth were too sharp, too pointed. Oh, they're all still with me. They're always with me now. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly. Emma's breath began to fog as she spoke. What are you? I'm just a little girl who got lost in a storm, Lucy said, standing up slowly. A long, long time ago. I was so cold, so wet. I knocked on door after door, but no one would let me in. They all just looked through their peepholes and turned away. As Lucy spoke, Emma could see dark shapes beginning to form in the corners of the room. Shadowy figures that seemed to shift and writhe in the firelight. I died out there in the rain, Lucy continued, her voice now layered with the voices of others. But I learned something important. People will open their doors for a child in need. They'll let their guard down. They'll invite death right into their homes. Emma backed toward the door, but found her way blocked by one of the shadow figures. It was the shape of an elderly woman, and Emma recognized the silhouette of Mrs. Henderson. The people who helped me, Lucy said, they become part of my collection. They help me knock on doors. They help me find new friends. More shadows appeared. A tall man who must have been Mr. Johnson. Several others Emma didn't recognize. They all watched her with hollow, hungry eyes. But you're different, Lucy said, tilting her head. You're a doctor. You save people. That's a special kind of soul. Emma raised the knife with trembling hands. Stay back. I won't let you take me. Lucy laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, Dr. Thompson, you already let me in. You invited me. You can't uninvite death. The shadows began to close in around Emma. She could hear Bradley's sirens in the distance, but she knew he would be too late. The knife in her hand felt suddenly heavy, and she realized her strength was being drained away. Don't worry, Lucy said, her form beginning to flicker and change. You'll help me save so many others. Think of all the people who will open their doors for a respected doctor in the community. They'll trust you completely. Emma tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows engulfed her, and she felt herself being pulled into the same cold, wet darkness that had claimed Lucy decades ago. When Officer Matthews arrived 15 minutes later, he found Emma's house empty. The front door was wide open, rain blowing in and soaking the hardwood floors. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of what had happened, just an empty house and a cold fireplace. But if he had looked more carefully, he might have noticed the small puddle of water by the couch, still dripping despite the fact that there was no leak in the roof above. 3 days later, the storm finally passed. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in a week, and the people of Millbrook began to emerge from their homes. Mrs. Patterson, who lived on the other side of town, was just settling in for the evening when she heard a soft knock at her door. She looked through the peephole and saw a little girl in a yellow raincoat, soaking wet and shivering. The child looked up with pale, desperate eyes. "Please," the girl said in a small voice. "I'm lost. I'm so cold. Can I come in?" But standing behind the little girl, barely visible in the shadows, was the figure of a woman in a doctor's coat. Her eyes were hollow and black, and she nodded encouragingly at Mrs. Patterson. "She's just a child," the woman's voice whispered through the door. "I'm Dr. Thompson. I've been looking after her. She needs help." Mrs. Patterson, who had known and trusted Dr. Thompson for years, didn't hesitate. She unlatched the door and stepped aside. "Of course," she said warmly. "Come in, both of you. Let's get you dried off."